recording this session for the benefit of a number of others that I know were really interested in being here, but for a bunch of different reasons weren't able to be here. Mark, how you going? Good to have you join us as well, just while we're doing that.
And I'd also like to say a special welcome to our guest speaker today, Michael Pennisi. Thank you very much for taking time to join us, Michael.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Bron. And look, as always, for those that might be new to the group, just expect a selection of very ad hoc screenshot photos that I'll be taking, which may or may not involve most or all of the group with their eyes closed. And that's one of my running. That's a
James special. It takes
one of my running jokes.
And everyone's got their eyes closed.
One day I will reach the holy grail of having everybody with their eyes closed in the whole photo. That's I like your one, Chris. Don't you worry, mate. There's plenty coming up that feature you, buddy. So. Okay. All right. Look, I will screen share and we'll get this moving, and we're just keeping it very relaxed today. There's no sort of hardcore interaction using Menti, but I'll just whack that up there on the screen for everyone and just checking you guys can see my Menti.
Just put it in present mode.
Yeah, it just didn't go the first time. Okay, just checking everyone can see that Menti presentation. There.
Great photo with me with my mouth open. Thanks.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I tried to find one of you with your mouth open and your eyes closed, but there was only 20 to choose from, so I thought I'd better put the lesser of two evils in, probably.
Thanks.
Yeah, so there we go. Okay, so look, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about the wonderful topic of, the artist formerly known as ESG. It's an absolute minefield, vortex and rabbit hole of a topic, but thankfully we've got Michael here with us today who's willingly volunteered his time. Hopefully he won't regret it by the end, to help us wade through this quagmire that is ESG. So just for the people that may be new and that may not be familiar with the way we work, that's what we'll be covering this session. And so if you're not already on Menti, just jump on. And Chris, I put in the best photo I could find for you there. So it's got Jen with her eyes closed, Warwick looking a little bit puzzled. I've got my eyes closed, and you look like you're trying to avoid falling asleep. So well done. Well done. Thanks. Thanks for that. Okay, and so that's what we're going to cover. So what is ESG? Why should I care? As well as a fireside chat with Michael. Just house rules for anyone that's new. So look, as much as you can, unless you're in an airport waiting lounge or somewhere where you're indisposed, camera and mic on, please, but obviously mic off when you're not conversing with us. Chatham House rules, which means, speak your mind, say what you mean what you say, but everything stays in the room. Really want people to contribute to the discussion, and I know Michael's very keen to have a very relaxed discussion in the Q&A. Be respectful of everyone else's perspectives, we know that. And obviously have fun and don't take yourself too seriously, because that's what this place is all about. Connect with each other, build relationships outside, have a laugh at yourself and others. That's the spice of life. Okay, so I'm going to move through this quite quickly so we can get to Bronwyn and can get to Michael. So I just wanted to take the time to give you some very, very brief high-level background on ESG and why should you care. So for those that might not even know what that acronym means, it stands for Environment, Social and Governance. Originally, and I'm trying to park my sarcasm there, it was known as SEG, but it was changed in the early 2000s by the UN to improve its marketing potential. The concept of what it means and what it looks like we're going to cover soon, but I guess the wider point is that it varies so considerably between sectors and industries depending on what your relevant commitments or obligations are in terms of compliance requirements, but then also the particular and individual commitments that you may or may choose to make as an organisation, whether that be to your customers, clients, shareholders, or other stakeholders. And we'll explain what that means in time. And I just noticed in that photo from Zoolander, I realised that's Gwen Stefani in the background for those that may care. And I thought, there you go. So what is ESG and why should you care? Just a little bit more of this background. So the term was coined by the UN in the early 2000s. And what I found, interestingly, it's a pointless kind of pub trivia fact. It was actually an Aussie bloke, and Rupert probably already knows
because we're all talking ESG and when we're doing pub trivia.
Of course, yeah. An Aussie economist who ended up being part of the UN team that coined that term in the early 2000s. Broadly speaking, it came out of this trend towards ethical investing, particularly in the institutional investment sector. And broadly, in terms of an overall description, it describes frameworks and systems that organisations use to measure, quantify, and report on business aspects and impacts against these categories. I'm not going to stress that too much more, as we said, varies considerably. Last one, and then I'm going to hand over to Bronwyn, is so think about these three disparate concepts. For a lot of organisations, they've got aspects of it all sitting separately or sitting in silos. The contemporary trend is bringing that together in, obviously, as we do with all things risk and risk management framework. So an ESG framework is when an organisation creates a reportable position and structure around ESG impacts and objectives in relation to the organisation. Usually, this framework is developed using what they call a materiality risk assessment, and we're not going to cover that today, but we'll talk about where to from here. Usually, it then also means that organisations can establish and outline their current position in terms of what we do now and what we want to do better in the future, and then use that as an opportunity to publicly display credentials through reporting schemes and certifications. And so many of you may have seen, you've got B Corp. Are many of us familiar with B Corp as an external certification? Yeah, so B Corp is, yeah, so it's like I guess it's a badge of honour, for want of a better term, in terms of demonstrating and role modelling ethics, accountability around diversity, ESG. Then you've also got the original, which was the GRI, so the Global Reporting Index. I think many of you may have heard about that in terms of, again, a scheme or a system to demonstrate or benchmark your credentials. My favourite is actually still the UN SDG, which stands for UN Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of us have probably seen it. It's a very colourful, positively framed set of goals, and I think they're pretty awesome. And then you've also got in, I guess, Europe and the US, the MSCI, which is the Morgan Stanley rating scheme, which again is a method of measuring performance in ESG and benchmarking against other organisations. So that was the whirlwind tour of ESG. And Bron, I'm going to hand over to you from here.
Okay, thanks for that, James. So, look, ESG, interestingly, and in our discussions with Michael earlier this week, it's a really big kind of topic, but it's something that's quite pressing, we believe, for all organisations to kind of get your feet under the desk with this a little bit. Organisations might struggle with it a bit, and also how it links to business strategy, performance and risk management. Interestingly, in Google, when you do some common searches in Google, you'll come up with, what is ESG? What's the definition of ESG? What's the difference between ESG and sustainability? So there's lots of searching going on in this space. And also when we surveyed you guys earlier this year, this was the second highest topic that we all wanted to learn a bit more about. So we just want to unpack it a little bit today to help us understand the links between ESG, risk and business performance, but also the importance of ESG to organisations in our current and our future operating environment, and the importance that staff, clients, investors, regulators, shareholders and communities might place on it. So chances are your organisation has already got an approach to some, if not all, of the aspects of ESG. It might be that you just haven't formalised it or labelled it in this way. So we'll try and demystify a little bit of it today and see how we can bring it together. But as James said, ESG stands for environmental, social and governance. And broadly, it refers to your business's practices and their impacts. And some aspects of ESG also have compliance reporting requirements, which is important to understand. So we've come up with some examples of what some of the components or the elements can look like under each of the categories. So for example, when you think about environmental, it might be your organisation's practices and policies as they relate to things like climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, water usage, waste and recycling, energy uses, natural resource conservation. So any of those sorts of things fit under the E component of ESG. And then when we think about social, this could be your approach to things like human rights, minimum wage payments, modern slavery, community relations, your supply chain and who's in it. And we've had lots of discussions about supply chain in this community in previous discussions. It could also be workplace safety, working conditions, ethical interactions you have with customers. So that's kind of the social component, or the S of the ESG. And then when it comes to governance, this is your practices on things like your management practices, your board independence, diversity and inclusion programs, corruption and fraud, conflicts of interest, whistleblower practices, just overall your ethical practices, and how they play out in your workplace. So you can see why it's a bit of a big topic and why some organisations might struggle a bit with it. But the expectations in this current operating environment from our staff, our clients, customers and communities is that businesses understand these issues and can articulate their agenda and their position on them. And it is also important, of course, to understand that some aspects of ESG have, thanks, James, sorry, can have compliance requirements. So it doesn't matter the size of your business, I guess, or the industry that you're in, integrating ESG factors into your corporate strategy formulation and your decision-making is good risk management. So every business faces a variety of ESG-related issues, but some have really got the potential to impact in your enterprise risks, things like your reputational risk, your finance risk, your compliance risk. But also there's significant benefits to organisations. I mean, the upside of doing this well and having a well-articulated ESG agenda is that can support business growth, progression and your reputation. So it can build stakeholder trust, it can build customer engagement, it can support shareholders in their investment choices. They may choose to invest in your company or not. Interesting, I wonder how many people are investing in Star City and, Crown Casinos right now based on the G component of their ESG agenda. But it can also support employee attraction and retention. And that's an issue lots of organisations still continue to struggle with as the millennials move stronger into the workplaces. So a well-integrated and implemented ESG program can also ensure your regulatory compliance. And there's lots of compliance around things like EPA, modern slavery. There's lots of regs and acts related to employment law and WHS. So it's all sort of inseparably linked to how you do business, and the individual elements themselves also have crossover. But thinking and acting on ESG in a proactive way has become more pressing for organisations. And where businesses need to think about ESG as a method of value creation and business success. So I guess that's kind of our, 101 around, a bit of the unpacking of ESG and helping to understand how it all kind of weaves together. So James, I might hand back to you and welcome Michael to the floor.
Yeah, sure.
That we can have a bit of a chat. And
Yep.
And then, of course, there'll be open forum for everybody to ask questions.
Okay. Yeah. And look, I think just to close the loop on that, just because, again, what was that word, Bronwyn, that we kept referring to yesterday that kept coming up in the literature? Nebulous. I know it's a bit of a wank word, but I feel like that's what certainly
it was a good word to use.
if the shoe fits. And so I think just what we'll do is there's a great HBR, like Harvard Business Review article we'll send out to everyone with the deck from today. And just before I launch into Michael, I'll just at least maybe draw our eyes to, let's call it, bringing everything together that Bronwyn and I have just said in terms of what does some of this stuff actually look like in practice, in terms of what Siemens is the case study that HBR used, but they talk about 6 core elements that you need to effectively build an ESG framework. And the 6 elements in no particular order are decarbonisation, ethics, governance, resource efficiency, equity, and employability. And so that's just one approach in terms of we could unpack each of those in really significant detail, but we don't need to, and we certainly
But we'll
can
share
send
the
that on.
article.
Yeah, to consider. But I think so for me, what it really comes down to, and I actually I'm stoked to have you in the room today, Fiona, because I actually think about you guys in that child services sector a lot. That if anything, I think there's opportunities within this for you guys as an organisation to really almost like display the credentials that we know you've really got front and centre a lot more proactively to the market and to the regulator that you work under and to your clients and your customers, because you guys particularly have got a hell of a lot to be really proud of in that space. And I think we don't want to view this as a negative exercise. We want it to be all about businesses being able to, as Bronwyn said, really build value and really understand how to, broaden stakeholder trust, how to broaden employee attraction and retention, all that sort of thing. So
does make me think, and James, there's a question in the chat room from Stuart, but does make me think about how organisations, particularly our friends, and we do call them friends in coal, are going to now, pitch their ESG agenda around things like climate change and some of the pressing issues in that space. So, I think whilst this did start in terms of ethical investing in the institutional space, it plays right across lots of organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Stu, to give you a couple of peel outs of that, equity is referring to inclusive and equitable policies, cultural messaging to promote a sense of belonging, and physical and mental well-being is the short answer. So there's a lot in that. And I mean, you could go, as we've said at the start, you can go down an absolute vortex on this, and it's kind of hard not to. But if we bring it
There's
back,
going to be a pop quiz at the end. Everyone's got to pass, or you can't get off the Zoom call.
That's right. You get stuck with us for the afternoon. No, so look, at the end of the day, though, we do stand behind the fact that good ESG, like all good risk management, as we always say, it can save you money and/or it can improve your ability to make more money. And if, like all other forms of risk management, if it's failing to do one or both of those things, then we would argue then it's not a good investment of time, money, or resources. So on that note, we'll jump over to Michael. And welcome, Michael, and thank you so much for giving us your time today to be able to come and have this fireside chat with us. So for those that may not know Michael's background, Michael's a very experienced senior executive who's held CEO roles in a number of large national and international organisations. And Michael is certainly, I know he likes to say he's not an expert in ESG, but we think he's got a fantastic perspective on it. And so welcome, Michael, and I'm going to fire a couple of quick questions at you and then hopefully be able to open to the floor for just a very relaxed conversation about this nebulous area that we call ESG.
Can I just jump in, James, if I could? Good afternoon, everyone. Fantastic to be here. Thanks for the invitation as well. Can I ask, what I'd like to talk to you is not in a way that is an annual report. So if you're happy and we can all trust one another within this group, that I can speak really frankly and actually hopefully get some value out of it. Is everyone comfortable with that? Great, thank you. The other thing is what I will also commit to you is you can ask me any question. If I can't answer it, I'll tell you why I can't answer it. And the other thing I've got to say is, and you'll understand why I'm about to say this, anything I say are my own personal opinions, any organisation that I've ever been affiliated with at any time now or in the future as well. There you go, there's a disclaimer.
And this does not constitute legal advice.
I was going to say, do you want us to put it under your screen there, mate? So it's nice and clear.
Yeah, thanks, lawyer Chris.
Yeah. Awesome. No, thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it. So you're right, I'll just launch. I've only got the two sort of opening questions for you. And then, as you said, we'll just go to some general discussion because I'm sure there'll be plenty. So I guess my first one, Michael, is to look as a business leader, what is your take on the reasons why organisations should proactively manage ESG? You know, is it just about stakeholder? Is it just about regulator? Is it just about compliance? Or is it, is it a moral imperative? Give us your perspective on how you fit that together in a complementary sense.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think it's a great question. I think what I'll start with, and I've said a couple of times in the lead-in, that you can go down so many rabbit holes with this. So I think the idea is it actually isn't that difficult at its core. So let's just make it really, really simple. So to answer to your direct question, James, It is the fact is you can't afford not to. It is as simple as that. So as a business leader, be it CEO, Chief Risk Officer, Chairman of the Board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you cannot afford not to take this into account. And if I was thinking about it as Bronwyn, as you were speaking, you were going through all the different parts of what ESG means, you know, the E, the S and the G and all the different components.
Yeah.
Think about those things together and you think about your own business. And I don't know your businesses and I would not even pretend to, but I'm from financial services. You think about all those different elements, you can really distill that down to it is just about how do you set your business up to be sustainable, to make money today, tomorrow, the next day, the next day, the next day after that, and to do it in an ethical way that is going to be supported by your stakeholders, being your customers, boards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do good for the community and your customers over the long term as well. I think the other thing I'd say is that many of you, or most, if not all businesses, are actually doing it today. So they've been doing it for some time. They're either on the evolution to doing it really well, or they've made a call based on their businesses to how far they need to go in the ESG field. I think the other thing that I'd say is that you all, as risk professionals, you are right in, I don't want to say the firing line, but you are right on the front line. So one thing I would say that I used to sleep much better at night because I had a fantastic CRO. I had a fantastic risk management framework, risk management strategy. Everything was put in place where we understood what the risks were. We understood what our aspiration was as an organisation. And I'm happy to talk about that if you'd like as well, because that really guides what the position you take from a risk perspective. And I was also really comfortable we had the reporting in place, but we also, if things didn't go well, and they don't always go well, then there were absolute plans in place that you could really quickly address them as well. And I think the last thing I would just say on this, it's really where culture, policy, strategy, and practice all comes together. And if you can get that vortex to work in a really, really clear way, and you can be aligned with your CEO, with your board, then you are in a really strong position. And I might leave it there because I'd love to hear your questions more so than me rabbiting on.
Okay. No, that's great. No, that's a fantastic response, Michael. And I think, yeah, just before we go over to the floor, I just want to fire another one at you because for most of you know my background, but for your benefit, Michael, I did environmental science years ago at uni, early in the 2000s. And so all these concepts of like triple bottom line and people, planet, profit, all this sort of stuff, they're all kind of, I wouldn't call them fringe dwelling concepts, but they were relatively fresh. And then I went into a mining safety and environment role. And next thing you know, this thing called environmental impacts assessments and all this process starts to come in with those standards. So for me, I've followed the evolution of the E part quite with a lot of personal vested interest. But I guess from the broader group's perspective, so we know that the concepts of the three haven't always been together for a bunch of different reasons. Is there a particular element that you think's undergone the biggest shift out of the three, E, S or G in the last few years in terms of business practice? Like, is there one you could put your finger on?
That's and again, I'll talk from the financial services. I hope that's okay. And
yeah,
my experience, I reckon in the last I'm going to say 3 years, certainly 4 years, it has gone from 0 to 100. So I'm not talking like an annual report. It's gone up from 0 to 100, and probably on three key ones if I think about it. The obvious one is climate risks. That has really come through some financial services. It's been driven by our customer bases. So in my case, the members as a superannuation fund, driven by stakeholders, driven by community expectations, and driven by regulators. So, for example, for banks, insurance companies, super funds, APRA, who's the regulator for some of those, and the RBA, the regulator for banks, has actually made statements that organisations, need to take account of climate risk as you do your businesses.
Yeah.
Those through. The other thing that's happened in the climate path is, quite rightly, or data points, unfortunate data points, where the massive bushfires a couple of years ago that tore through many parts of Australia, and we've had floods, weather events constantly. They are a ready reminder that climate risk is real, and they are causing big institutional investors like the ones I just mentioned to really step back, align what they're doing with their aspiration. And if you're big in the fields that I just talked about, you're aspiring to be industry leading, which means very, very high position. So that flows through to the whole businesses that you run. So climate, I think, is a real big one that has really taken off. I think the other ones would be equality and diversity. On a board of a association that was involved in setting principles and rules and conventions. It is diversity, inclusion, diversity of every kind. I can tell you, sitting in many boardrooms, that it is a topic that is discussed at every single meeting.
Okay.
Just have we got policies in place? We moved from have you just got a policy in place years ago to what are you doing about it? What does it look like? What are your plans? What are the actual outcomes? And how is that all coming together to form the culture of the business that we have all got joint responsibility to run? I think the other big one, I think, is probably supply chains and the Modern Slavery Act. So in 2018, I'm sure you all know, the Modern Slavery Act in Australia came into being. And that then also pointed the gaze as an employer, as an organisation, as a business, also as an investment manager, that look through the vendors that you have or are working with and make sure those vendors, but also every investment you make, are in ethical organisations that are doing the right thing by their employees, by the environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I reckon those three things, certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, are the ones that I've spent a lot of time with my and the board talking a lot about, and making sure we weren't just ticking boxes. I'm happy to talk about that till the cows come home. We also, spending time using a lot of verbiage, but actually doing nothing. That because the pressure, rightly so, is on.
Yeah. Wow. All right. No, thank you, Michael. That was a great response, and I think you don't have to look too far. I mean, unfortunately, our coal clients that we invited weren't able to join us today, but I know that one of them just published publicly their modern slavery report, and that's the inaugural one that they've actually delivered publicly. And I guess even, like or hate the coal sector, it's interesting to see how things are shaping and changing there. And certainly, obviously, you'd be familiar with the Rio Tinto report on lack of equality and behavioural outcomes and other things like that. That's driven a lot of change. So look, thank you. That was great. And Bron, did you want to share some questions from the audience now?
Yeah, sure. And I'll just make one observation in terms of, sort of a well articulated ESG agenda. James and I were talking with a coal client not that long ago who was really struggling to attract staff out, interns and graduates out of university, given the publicity, I guess, that sits around coal and climate change and all those sorts of things. And so they really sort of, I guess, struggled in that space. They just weren't able to attract uni graduates to come into that sector, because of that sort of I guess, publicity that sits around coal, and then individual personal choices that people make about where they choose to go to work, where they choose to invest their money, who they choose to be a customer or client of. It's all of those sorts of things. I feel like this is really sort of coalescing into that space. So I'm not surprised that ESG is something that organisations really need to start to get a handle on. But I'll put it out to the floor now, enough, rabbiting on from me. Does anyone have a question for Michael, I guess, in terms of ESG?
Without getting too political on it, we have just had the elections on the weekend, and that's brought in a change of government. And
I knew you were going to raise this.
Yeah, I know.
Go, Chris.
You could almost draft my question for me, couldn't you?
Yes.
But what impacts do you think that's going to have in this sector? Because it was a big deal, the climate going through it, and I think I don't know if either party really hit them up for myself, but where do you see those impacts coming through? I see legally there's definitely some employment law impacts starting to come through, and it's a whole lot more Greens in the Senate now. So we've got a sort of a pretty significant shift, I think, that's come through on Saturday. And the independents, I sort of haven't sat down and had a proper look as to what that landscape looks like yet. But just wondering if you've had any opportunity to reflect and think on what that may look like for us.
Yeah, and again, I'll reinforce these are my personal views. Look, I think it's really interesting. I think what, not getting into a political discussion, but more of a, if you like, a helicopter process or outcomes discussion. So I think what the election said to me is that there's a move, or a movement within, Australian society, which is that, and I'm not the first person to say this, the major political parties haven't been listening. So people are saying we want something different. The question then is, how is that going to transpire to different outcomes? What does that look like? I think you're right. Is it Stu? Is it? I haven't got any names. Was it Stu who you asked the question?
Oh, no, it was Chris.
Sorry, Chris. I've got no. So I'm not going to mention anyone's names. I think what's going to be really interesting is how this transpires.
Christopher McCord, I'll give you his email and his phone number if you want, Michael. See.
Excellent lawyers.
We just published a disclaimer down the bottom for you, mate. It's all good.
Yeah.
I think what's going to be really interesting how this transpires and what it looks like. So is there likely to be more legislation put in place which is absolutely focused and tightening this up? I reckon you're right. I reckon that's exactly where it'll go. And, I've got no problem with that. Good legislation made with good intent by smart people who have debated it properly is never a bad thing. So again, I put my faith in democracy and I put my faith in the political system as well. I think what's really interesting, because some of the criticisms I've read of the former government was it was not kind to the environment, et cetera, et cetera. We've probably all heard those things. What I'll tell you as the CEO of a large organisation in the past, there were many things that were happening and many pressures that were being exerted upon organisations that have nothing to do with government policy. The tide, I saw and felt the tide turn probably about 3, maybe 4 years, probably about 3 years ago on, people being very, very vocal about what they expect from their financial institutions, why they expect that, and being very clear about articulating what that looked like. There are some very significant also interest groups who are very well organised, they're very well funded, and they have very good research to back them up. And as a big financial institution, you are dealing with them quite often and regularly. So again, that's independent of the government of the day. And I think that has now, there's a snowball effect happening. I do not and cannot see that reversing in any way, shape or form. I can only see that getting larger, more vocal, more influential. And I think that's a good thing as well. I think the other side of it is then what do the regulators, how will they respond and what does that look like? And I think that's going to be really interesting. My guess would be that obviously regulators enforce legislation. So let's just make it really clear. If we think that legislation is going to be more detailed, direct, more and with more requirements, the regulators have an obligation to act with that. I think what's going to be really interesting, and particularly if I look in the super space, that super funds have there is a new obligation that came into effect last July, which is, I'll say it really simply, every dollar you spend has to deliver a financial benefit to your members. Okay. There's that application versus what a principle that all super funds have to abide by, which is you need to do the You need to do that. But also we have a regulator which says climate risk is real and you need to take that into account in how you do things. Now, when I talk to executives and CROs in the super landscape, as I used to, they will tell you that's a really tough and fine line to traverse, because on one side, you've got to get the best financial outcome. On the other side, you've got to take into account this risk. Those things don't often
line up.
What's really interesting and what I was really happy about is all the big players. You find a way around a problem, and that's not to say that you are circumventing. I say it a different way. If you are a large institutional investor, say a big super fund, and you have a portfolio which has, let's call them coal miners, let's call them emitters, et cetera, carbon emitting organisations, you might have an aspiration to be a zero net carbon emitter by 2050 in line with Paris. Absolutely. Then it's how do you get there? You've got to have a path to get there. And the path isn't always 100% divestment. It is being an active owner and working with the companies with which you have large stakes to make a difference. So it is a multi-pronged approach. So after saying a lot of words then, what I think is going to happen is a very much a continuation of the path with, as I said, the snowball effect, because it is a steam train which will not stop.
Yeah, great. And I guess I could see, Stu, you asking that question there about modern slavery. Was there any sort of follow-up or addendum to that you wanted to throw out to Michael as well around, because obviously that's a very new piece of legislation. For those that have been in the group a while, Rupert and ourselves have bounced that ball around for some time. A lot of us are doing declarations of modern slavery now when we're going for tenders and things like that, or publishing very detailed statements. But so, yeah, I guess
we've even had to submit them when we've been putting tenders in.
For coal clients, interestingly. So yeah, was there a follow-on point from that, Stu? Are you happy with that answer around risk assessment?
Look, I guess that's as you said, that's a pretty good way to start. But and you're just saying that there's tenders that we put in, we've got to put in our modern slavery policies and procedures and everything. They're a little bit, well, for us, they're a little bit throwaway, just to try and win the contract, rather than actually genuinely going and seeing or knowing exactly what our overseas clients or things are doing to ensure that. And I don't have a full understanding of what modern slavery is. I'm sure it has a huge range of different aspects to it. But I mean, the way we've always seen it is making sure that our overseas clients are paying their staff and treating their staff in a fair fashion. But is there anything else that we should be considered to make this document useful for us, essentially, if we're going to be making it applicable to all our large kind of mining or any other organization? Yeah, good point. And Mo, I figured being in the software space as well, you'd probably have a perspective on that. So did you want to add to that, and then maybe Michael can respond, if that's okay, Michael?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, James. Yeah, just following up from Stuart's point about the understanding of what a particular policy looks like from an ESG perspective of managing risk. How do you say supporting, I guess, people in the organization to understand what those things mean? Because to make those policies work in any particular environment or industry, they need to understand it. And it's the people that are going to support the organizations or people operating those organizations that are going to be the enabler for it to work. So what do we do about that from a training perspective, or communicating those messages effectively in a way that they can digest the information easily, they can see the point behind it, but also most importantly, they can support those that are implementing it or leading the way forward with it?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, and it is a really big question. So I'm going to try and distill it down as quickly as I can. I think it starts from the top. So you've got to have, what is your aspiration as a business? So is your aspiration to be a leader? And whatever that means in the environment or the sector in which you operate. Can I use an example of a large superannuation fund? If I can, that's
feel free.
Not by way of doing it. So just to bring it to life. So this is what I said, I think right at the beginning, I said, look, it's the intersection of where culture, strategy, purpose all comes together in practice. And it is a matrix. And that's the only way this works. So, you know, in this fictitious large super fund that I was talking about, or insurance company, you know, you made a call about where you wanted to be on the spectrum. And, you know, if you're one of the largest in the country, look, I'm going to stop talking in riddles. I'll tell you exactly what we did. Basically, we
just go for it.
We said we're one of the largest funds in the country, and we had one of the largest life insurers we owned as well in the country, and one of the largest financial planning firms. We basically sat down and said, you know what, we've got an obligation to do the right thing every time for our people, for the community, and we need to do things. We needed to do good. Do we all believe that? And to a person, we said, absolutely. Okay. So if you set that up, that means we decided that we needed to be an exemplar. Exemplar in every element of what we did, be it risk, compliance, community, etc. Now, we spent a hell of a lot of time with our people saying, here's what we stand for, what we think we stand for. Do you agree with that? Great. And then what we did is a whole host of work, countless and countless hours, getting our people to build the culture from below, to bring it up. So we never built the culture. I never sat at the top and said, this is the Q Super culture. Neither did the exec team. We said, let's build it together. Now, why that was important? Because inherent in all of that was all the do good. But we also spent a lot of time building a risk culture where we made it really clear, and we got the buy-in that risk wasn't a handbrake. It was actually part of the accelerator. And then once—
I love it. You're speaking our language.
Yeah, well, and it was absolutely critical, because what we had to make sure was we didn't have a bunch of people who were hiding things. It had to be okay that you were going to raise things and they were going to be treated on merit, and they were going to be addressed, and you played the issue, not the person. Now, that's not as simple to do as what I just said, but we spent a hell of a lot of time doing that. So if you've got the foundations of a culture of transparency, openness, all pulling towards the same goal, then having your people embrace new risks as they come across, new opportunities, which is just as important, become a much easier task. And if you couple that with a culture where people will say, hang on a sec, I got a problem with that. What you just said, Michael, was X, and that was counter to what I thought our values and beliefs were being. It's gold, and you can absolutely go anywhere. I think it would be really difficult to simply— I'll say it a different way. I think it is— you're in the worst position in the world if your risk and compliance function is tick a box. You might as well forget it, because that is a guaranteed path to out the back door as well. So you've got to bring it together, and it's got to be built on culture, your people, acceptance, and ambition as well.
Yeah. So just
and
summarising
culture, the way that, you know, your organisational culture is just so critical to your overall business success for everything. But, you know, and this is just another part of that. Yeah.
So I was going to say, so just to summarise that then, Michael, so you're saying that what I took out of that, and Mo, you tell me if that answers your question or not, in terms of building the culture from the top down and the bottom up, or together. So obviously not a top down driven culture, but then it also sounds like a supporting part of that is having a risk and compliance function that actually works in its intended outcome, in terms of not being a handbrake, but it's also supported as an element of that culture where people will call out things that are not aligned to the organisation's values or purpose. They were probably the three sort of pertinent things that came to life for me out of that. Mo, does that feel like that answers the question?
That's pretty much answered the question, or the majority of the question. The other part I was looking to build on from that is proactively getting people involved in initiatives, understanding the sustainability outcomes. What are we working towards as an organisation? From a learning perspective, you know, so then people know that the organization haven't only set the tone once, but they're proactively working towards a particular outcome, right? So that's the other side of the coin that I was going on.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
you're absolutely sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, no, I think, Michael, did you want to me, that comes to mind there about reporting schemes and benchmarks and certifications. Could you comment maybe on that if you've had experience with it? And sorry,
Yeah, I think,
yeah.
James, you're right. I think you need all that, but I call them sort of lag indicators. And so I think what you're talking about is, you put it, you got to use trendy words, the lead indicators of how you do that. And I think that really comes down into, have you got a culture of innovation? Have you got a culture of taking measured risks, and are those rewarded? And if they don't go so well, there's not a culture of blame. That is really, really critical to do it. And I think specifically, I can just think of an example of exactly what you're saying. And in the ESG space, so I can't get into specifics, but the policy, and it was a very, very important policy in the investment space, was created by the investment team. It was then taken through our investment committee and then taken through the board. Now, why that was really important, because policies fall down when someone lands it on your desk and says, you've got to implement this, and you look at it and go, this is never going to work. You've missed this, and this. This was such an important policy that having the investment team, in fact, build it, it was therefore investable and practical. And then they stood before the investment committee and the board and said, this is what we need to do, and here is why, and we 100% back it. So support at every level through that is gold.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Who else?
Any other questions from the floor?
I had one. This is Samir.
Hey, Samir.
For companies, is there any minimum disclosure requirements as part of this ESG? That was my first question. And then the second one is, sitting as an outsider or an investor, how do I get comfort over the number that has been reported is correct or not in absence of them being audited?
Good question.
Sorry, can you give me a little bit more on that last one?
So if I'm an investor in a company, right, how do I get comfort that ESG numbers that are reported in their statements are correct or accurate?
Yeah. Look,
I have a similar question. Where do you get assurance from?
yeah, look, and so the reason I had that reaction is because I'm fortunate that I've come from an organisation that had about 60 people whose job it was to understand every single investment we had, right down to every single element of it. So, we never entered into an investment, given, what this organisation was, where we didn't understand every single element. And the board and investment committee, and I can recall the meetings, were very, very clear about ensuring that ESG matters were not just ticked, we understood them, we took them into account, and we made value judgments based on that. Your question about if you haven't got those resources behind you, I think then how do you get comfort? I think that then comes down to your risk appetite of the organisation that you work for. Your risk appetite, your risk management statement, your risk management framework, what does that look like? And then, so how much risk are you prepared to take if you are not able to get every piece of data? That's a question that can only be answered by, the organisation that is looking to make an investment. And again, driven by your risk appetite. Samir, does that help a little bit, I hope?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Michael.
And because I think it could also come down to, I guess, your supply chain a bit, because the comfort, I guess, that you might be looking for, Samir, could also be with organisations about who are they partnering with and who are they working with. And it's that kind of comfort that I know my organisation's fine, but I want to get into an arrangement with another organisation. How do I test and know that what they're telling me is right, I guess? So there's that kind of component of it in your supply chain, I guess, too.
Yep, agree, Bron. And I think and it comes down to also, is it a tick a box exercise or is it a real exercise? And I think the days have gone where it can just be a ticker box, but it's got to be fit for purpose.
Yeah, yeah. Rupert, you look like you had a query or something to throw into the mix there as well.
Yeah, you have to forgive, we've got some renovations going on there, so there's a bit of noise in the background. I mean, honestly, being based in Asia, I'm pretty cynical about a lot of this, because a lot of the big companies, it's fantastic to hear, Michael, and there are definitely some good ones there, but there are a lot of companies that are just kicking the can down their supply chain. They're following that ticker box compliance route. And if we're honest, a lot of the risk lies in those smaller companies that supply the big ones. So you can talk about financial services, manufacturing, even Amazon, Apple, all these people, they don't actually do very much that's direct risk. The ESTA diversity piece, yes, some of the social internal bit, but the environmental risk and the governance risk sits within their supply chain, within their partners, within their investment. And when you're incentivized to report on numbers that, as Samir said, aren't always sort of held accountable, or there's an inherent conflict where you're getting someone like the Big Four to give you a sort of a score, and they also want to keep you as a client, so they're going to give you a favorable score. I see a lot of performative stuff. So what I'm more interested in is what the big companies can do to actually pass them, to Mo's point, to share the love, to pass the resources that they have, the skills that they have, the knowledge that they have down their supply chains to help educate and improve the people that they work with, or if your investments is portfolio companies. So I'm working at the moment with a Nordic impact fund, and one of the things they do on each significant investment is they make sure that they're putting into those portfolio companies or those investees proper processes and systems in place so that they can actually, rather than just getting a ticket box, so that they can actually go on and manage that. So that's an involved process, and you've got to be committed. So I think I really want this to work personally, but I see, certainly on the front lines, I see a lot more tick the box, fill out a form, have a statement, than which I think is going to undermine this, particularly with younger people who are a bit more savvy about where they want to place their careers. So I'm looking for, I don't know that don't have answers, but I'm interested in ways that we can improve overall transparency around the ESG frameworks.
Yeah. Do you want me to just jump in there, James?
Sure.
Yeah, I reckon that's a great point, and you're absolutely right. It is not universally adopted. It's not universally not ticker box, to put it poorly, as well. What I'd say confidence, a fair bit of confidence in, not a fair bit of confidence, what I think will happen is large institutional investors will lead the way for a whole host of reasons, because there are the expectations by multiple stakeholders, and it is basically being inculcated within the fabric of these large institutional investors. So in the Australian context, we're talking about, trillions of dollars or $1 trillion is absolutely focused on do the right thing, invest in companies that are, et cetera. I won't go through. So I think the sheer weight of money, and if you look at, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, so I actually won't quote numbers, but if you look at UNPRI, the signatories to that, which, from when it was established some time ago to where it is today, it's exponential growth. If you are a large institute, if you're a large player in capital markets, you are expected and you have signed up to these principles and what that means. So it's almost, to me, a bit like follow the money, because that's where the pressure is going to start being played out. And it'll be played out in either we will not invest with you, we will invest with you as long as you make changes, or we're going to use our power through sheer weight of money, dollars, to enforce change. Now, as that again gains more and more traction, I believe that change is going to come through. I think from where you're going, I do think that small, medium-sized enterprises, they're not there, and I don't think any of us would pretend that they're there as well. But I do believe in the trickle effect, and I think, as I said, the sheer weight of money, I think, will enforce change. And I've seen so much change in the last couple of years; it will start flowing through.
Yeah. Okay. No, great.
And I guess there's
great.
pieces there for the big people of the world to influence, coach, and support the little people of the world, because it's in everyone's best interest to do this.
Yeah. It's about setting standards, and
Yeah.
that will become more for everyone. So, the tide will rise and the boats will rise as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, look, just echoing Rupert's point, and then I think we'll probably might call it quits, Michael, is that, yeah, definitely given the sectors that our organisation works in, we certainly continue to see at times a bit of we see everything in terms of, we see the genuinely committed organisations that do want to do it the right way, whether they are a big institutional investor or not, and then the sort of tokenistic, look at us, we're engaging with an Aboriginal community, aren't we wonderful? Let's pat ourselves on the back, and everything in between. And so I think, even if you leveled it at, I know Bron and I like to talk about, if you leveled it at the big banks in Australia, they've gone through an evolution, I think, as well, of being a little bit tokenistic,
Love sticking it to
particularly
the banks.
Yeah. In that, let's call out that Indigenous affairs space. We feel like they've come through an evolution of being quite tokenistic, through to understanding at a deeper level what they can actually do to influence in a positive way, rather than just throw money at things that don't necessarily do anything tangible, but make themselves feel good and their shareholders go, hey, aren't we wonderful humans, that kind of thing. So
and James, I think you're absolutely, and I'll temper what I say, but some of the practices that came out of the Royal Commission in relation to Indigenous communities was absolutely abhorrent. And good that it came out, and now we've got to make sure it never happens again. And I agree with you. I've got zero tolerance and zero time for organisations that sprout on about how great they are and what they do, and they've got all the fancy brochures, but you ask, you only have to ask two questions. If you can ask the first question and people will normally be able to answer it, always ask the second question, and you'll find out really, really quickly whether someone is real with what they're saying. And there were too many times when the second question couldn't be answered. I think that will become less, because people are far more attuned and there are far more smarts about it, and expectations have risen.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Rupert said, I think the younger generation, so younger than all of us in the room, as he said, Rupert, they're even savvier again, and they can smell bullshit a mile away. So
yeah, good.
Yeah. That's how we want. That's how we raised them.
All right. Well, look, what we might do is leave it at that, because we've just shot the clock, and I'm sure you would all join me in thanking Michael for such a fantastic and candid Q&A, because I certainly thought it was fantastic, and really appreciate your time. And look, next month we're actually going to go on hiatus. That's right, isn't it, Bron? So, because that's June.
Is that a fancy way of saying we're going on leave?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. We're both going to separately be on holiday in different locations at the time that this falls in June. So chat amongst yourselves. We won't be back until July.
But we look forward to July. And if you've got any pressing topics that you would like to see added to our agenda, or anything that you'd like to put forward, or anything that you'd like to talk about for July, we're always open to feedback. So please send your emails through. We're always listening to what you guys want to talk about. So
and look, to on that note, what we will do is shoot just individually to the people that have attended today a couple of dot points, because we'd just like to know, now that we've kind of skimmed across the top of ESG, are there any particular areas of it that you're like, I need to know
deeper
dive about that? Just hit us up with it, and we'll see what we can bring together. And then also too, hopefully July, Chris, I was going to say, we're hoping we're going to be coming live and direct from, is it the new Hickson's
office in
the new Hickson's office, we hope, maybe, possibly?
Yeah, the invite's out there for everyone in Newcastle, or even if you'd like to day trip to Newcastle, more than welcome to come and hang out in our office for the meeting, and we'll put on a light lunch and show you our new harbour views.
So Chris
Very
has got
nice.
free food, everyone.
Yeah, that's right. No, I heard,
Now
it was,
listen,
I
with
heard,
the
it, I heard
Harvard
it was his
Business
shout
article.
as well.
Oh, biz too. One.
It's included in the
Could
budget.
be a very
It's all
interesting
good.
section. Now listen, with the Harvard Business Review article that will circulate as well, please don't tell anyone. We're not sure we've covered reprint permissions. So, you know,
But,
just
but anyway, yeah, you never got it from us.
that's right.
All right, no worries. All right, well, thank you very much for
My
joining us.
internet just stopped working there. Sorry, I missed what you said.
Yeah, the recording stopped as well.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
all right.
Everyone have a really
Thanks,
good rest of the
everybody.
week.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks again.
take